Hi, I'm Mac, and I love useless objects. So after the Steam Deck was delayed from December 2021 to February 2022, I finally received mine. There's 3 different models of the Steam Deck with varying prices and features. I was able to nab the cheapest one, because I like to get everything on a bargain. Even carpal tunnel. Now you may be asking, why the hell did you buy this, Mac? Which is a pretty good question. After all, your motivation for buying something determines what your standards are for what you want to get out of it. My motivation for buying the deck was that I clicked the reserve button for fun. And then it actually worked, so I just committed to the bit. To be fair though, I did have reasons to be interested in the Steam Deck. I'm a handheld enthusiast, so as a collector, I found the thing really interesting, and the idea of being able to play my Steam games without leaving my bed had an undeniable appeal. Oh, also, I missed out on getting one of those weird, neat Steam controllers when they were being sold, so in case the Steam Deck was a massive failure and was discontinued, the collector in me would be happy to have one. So if you are looking for a first impressions video that's going to talk about emulation or running Windows on this thing, then you're going to want to keep looking. It shouldn't be too hard. Anyway, let's get to my actual first impressions. What's the first thing you think of when you see this bad boy? Mine's arthritis. When they first revealed the deck, I thought, man, that button and joystick placement looks clumsy as hell. But it's not as terrible as I thought. It's definitely a little uncomfortable depending on what you're playing, but it's not too bad. Some people worried it would be uncomfortably small to hold like the Switch was for them, to which I say, that's not a problem, just stop being a 6-foot-tall man and you'll be fine. I'm also pleased to report that it is easier to inflict blunt force trauma with this thing than it is with the Switch. Weighing in at nearly twice as much as a normal Switch, I found that it's nearly impossible to comfortably hold this thing with one hand without pressing down on the back buttons. Which is a definite problem if the hentai game you're playing has anything mapped to those. Something cool that Valve did was that they published files allowing you to 3D print your own external shells for the Steam Deck. I'm sure we'll see a lot of very cool alternate shells soon. Now, for the actual software, Valve has this thing called Deck Verified, where basically they verify games that they've tested and fixed to be totally compatible with the deck. Though this doesn't mean to say that you can't play non-deck verified games on the deck, but there's a higher chance of compatibility issues. Of course, if you wouldn't normally choose to play a game with a controller, then you probably shouldn't expect to want to play it on the deck. That's unless you feel like the 2 touchpads make up for the lack of a mouse. These touchpads are what initially got me interested in the Steam controller. They're an interesting way of getting around the limitations of a traditional controller. The touchpads have some unexpectedly satisfying haptic feedback to them, but as of this very early review, I haven't really found any good use for them. Even the tech demo barely used them, and the games I played benefited way more from just using the joysticks. The only real utility they had was to move the cursor in the Chrome browser. But this thing already has a touchscreen. But hey, maybe I just don't have the right games in my library to really test them out. Anyway, I played several games on this thing, including all of Aperture Desk Job, the very short free Portal spin-off that launched on March 1st after its surprise announcement on the day the deck launched. It's basically the system's tech demo. You play as an Aperture employee set vaguely in the 80s in the earlier days of the company as revealed to us in Portal 2. Speaking of which, I also played Portal 2 on the deck, and as expected, it runs fantastic, but you really don't want to be playing Portal with a controller if you can help it, in my opinion. Going back to Aperture Desk Job, it's a 30-minute experience with plenty of cheeky nods to the series, although there's no spoilers, so I recommend playing it even if you haven't played the Portal games. Although, as I'm saying this, I realize if you're getting a Steam Deck this early, you probably have played the Portal games already. Just a hunch. I also played the Binding of Isaac Repentance, which worked great, and Enter the Gungeon, which worked great, but I still prefer mouse and keyboard. I started hitting a wall in terms of deck-verified games I could play that were in my library, so I decided to try Juicy Realm, a great indie roguelike that has total controller support, but is as of now untested for the deck. I'm happy to report that I completed a run without a hitch. The game works just as well as the verified ones, so don't let that little question mark deter you from taking some of the not too demanding games with controller support in your library for a spin. I can't guarantee they'll work as well as Juicy Realm, but it's likely that it'll take a long time for these smaller indies to get verified, so you might as well take things into your own hands. By the way, it's worth noting that Juicy Realm's already top-notch art style looks fantastic on the deck screen. I have to give this thing props. The 7-inch screen is the same size as the Switch OLEDs, but the resolution is much higher, and I think it looks fantastic. Well, I hope this has been a nice and simple little summary of what the Steam Deck is all about and how I feel about it within a month of its release. I'm sure I haven't really said much that hasn't been said already, but I'd like this to be like a little time capsule that captures the very start of a new system for us to look back on this channel in the future. And if you want me to stop sharing my stupid opinions, you are going to have to kill me. And not with this, you're gonna have to get it first try.